And also, it's great to see some old friends again that I haven't seen in a long time. This is this when you say this is a community, that is the real truth. This is a community of people who've both been competitors and cooperators. So that perspective of being able to build up the community is something I've always appreciated about the Dynamics groups that are out there. So, like you mentioned, I've been a part of the Dynamics community for a good long time. Started implementing Dynamics CRM or Microsoft CRM 1.0 back in about 2002, 2003, roughly in that time frame, and saw the growth of this incredible platform really as it evolved into this amazing tool that people could use to adapt and solve business problems very quickly over the time. Through that curve, one of the pieces that I got excited about was the ability to turn it into a business application, of course, and bring in additional data into the platform and also to be able to report on it. Because I kept finding that the best way to show the value of this tool is to show it in reports to the business decision makers. And that gave us ultimately a great opportunity to see forward. So before we get started in this, let me share a couple of ideas around as a Dynamics app, a Dataverse expert, why should I care about Power BI? It's part of the platform, but ultimately it's actually treated, in some cases, it's treated as sort of this cousin to the platform, because it does require some additional skills or some different skills than maybe what you're accustomed to using in the Dataverse platform. But ultimately, it's really a completion to the solution, if you ask me. So let me talk about a couple of different perspectives on it. Number one, it extends the usability and the value of your apps by including these Power BI aspects to it. And we're going to see a lot more as we go into it, but I wanted to sort of set the stage. And that really is by giving you that magical 360-degree view that we've always looked at and promised. Dataverse data, we can expose it through Power BI without that 50,000 row limit that's implied onto the out of the box charts. And we can pull in external data. We can mash the data we have in Dataverse with external data into reports at the time it's needed. And we don't have to worry about lift and shifting of the data. We can have it in real time for the user to take advantage of. We also have the ability to add some artificial intelligence over our data that sits in Dataverse without external tools. We just bring it into Power BI, and the analytics tools take care of and expose us to some real powerful tools. And we'll see a little bit more about that. Contextually, we have the ability to have contextual reports in Power BI. By looking at a single record, we can use that single record in Dataverse as kind of a launching point to see data we're pulling in from other systems and to pull that together. In fact, I've used this in my own organization, where the part of Microsoft that I work in that we had an application, we had a Dataverse application, we're tracking customer questions or customer issues. And, as anybody who's implemented a Power App or any kind of business app, the challenge is getting people to actually use it and getting people to pull, to go, okay, I remember I have to go to this link, log in and pull in data from I'll log my call with the customer. It's a challenge. But what we did is we pulled together some reports that were commonly used about when we had a question from a customer. So Contoso Industries calls in, and we're going to have a conversation with Contoso. And real quickly, we want to know something about what's going on within Contoso. Now, in the past, we had to limit that to what was inside of Dataverse in a CRM perspective. But now with Dataverse plus Power BI, in my environment, in my own team's work, we'll pull up the customer record, and immediately from that customer record, we'll launch a query out to several other systems, bring all that data in via report, actually through multiple reports inside of that record, and give us the 360 review that we need in order to be able to effectively serve that customer. And finally, the real benefit that I wanted to make sure that we capture and land is it increases the speed. I'm sorry, I'm in the way here, but increases the speed and completeness of adoption of your application. Um, Ultimately, we can build these magical applications in Dataverse, but if nobody's using them, it doesn't do us or anybody else any good. But by pulling this together and making this, enriching your application by using Dataverse plus Power BI, you can make that solution much more rich and much more complete and lead to adoption. And in fact, in my team's case, once we pulled those applications together, pulled those reports together within the application, the adoption just went straight up, because suddenly Dataverse, this application we built, became the go-to place to get data. It became the easiest place to go get data. And so all this rich data that had been worked on by other teams, we took advantage of it and made our application just a real go-to. Ultimately, it's the best way to expose the value of the data that sits inside a Dataverse to your business decision makers. And by that, I mean really the people who are consuming not just the people who are working on it from a transactional perspective of, creating opportunities or creating records, solving cases, those types of transactional actions that happen inside a Dataverse, but really for the people that are the managers, the people who look and say, I want to see beyond the vision of just a transactional application and look at it and see, how do I understand my business as a total? But as a Dynamics, Power Apps, Dataverse expert, you're putting yourself into that pivotal role that helps bring the business forward. And it's a great career perspective to be able to help solve bigger and bigger problems based on the richness of the data you have inside a Dataverse. So let's take a look at it from several different perspectives. And we're going to look at it from perspectives of what kinds of integration points we have, or how you can pull the two together. We'll look at some various ways in which it shows up, look at integration, and then we're going to talk about Dataverse data, what kind of reporting options we have on the Dataverse data. We have some direct ways, we have some indirect ways. We'll talk a little bit about those and give you some options that are out there, because no two peoples have the same use case. So we got some choices for you to look at, and we'll describe kind of best benefit of different styles in order to take advantage of that. Finally, we'll talk about connecting Power BI directly to Dataverse. So there is this really cool way of doing a direct query from Power BI. So the Power BI report just launches and immediately queries Dataverse and inherits all the security roles, and pulls up data immediately out of Dataverse and it displays it. So there's real advantages there, but there's also some limitations you want to be aware of, or some challenges you can work around. And I'll give you some tips on that. And finally, I've got a boatload of resources at the end of this presentation, and I've got a shortcut to the presentation itself if you want to download and grab those resources at the end. I'll show that at the very end. So Power BI integration inside of Power Apps or Dynamics 365. Now, I grew up on Microsoft CRM, Dynamics 365. So a lot of times you're going to hear me refer to Dynamics or Power Apps. Ultimately, we're talking about the Dataverse platform that all these rich tools are built over top of. How do we do it? Let's take a look. The option. So there's some choices here we have. We can build a report and we can show it in system dashboards, in forms, in the Canvas app, the portal. Then we also have the idea of a Power BI dashboard. You have a report and you have dashboards. The dashboards are probably not as heavily used, but even within a dashboard, you can pull out a single element as a tile and use it. And that's some different ways in which those are available to us. We can also take from within a Power BI report, we can embed a Power App Canvas app inside the report to take advantage of data that's there, as well as we can embed a cloud flow inside of a Power BI report. So, I mean, these are, right in the middle of this Power Platform available to us as a really rich solution area. So I've got some visuals here to see them. You can see them, but in fact, I'd rather just show it to you live. So I'm gonna Alt Tab over to my I remember which tab I have. We go to Let me open my, whoops, that's the wrong tab. Let me find the right tab. There it is. Dataverse. Here we go. All right. So now we're looking at my Dataverse, and the basic idea is I'm sitting in Dataverse. I've got opportunities or cases or customer records, whatever I want to work on. And I have in Dataverse this really cool dashboard ability. I can pull up data that's in it. And by the way, all the data that's in this is fictional data. So there's none, I mean, there's some real names, people names of my team members, but it's all fictional customer information. But I can pull up the reports that you may have already seen in Power BI, I mean, in Power Apps that have some, some ability to show some charts, etc. And there's some cool blog posts out there about how you can customize them, but they do run at real time with the user's security model. And as a result, to protect the integrity or to protect the performance of the application, they are limited to like 50,000 rows. So if I have 100,000, if I have 50,001 rows, it's going to put an error message up and say, this can't, we've exceeded the size of the report. And so you can't do that. As well as there's other limitations of, I only have a handful of chart visuals I can use, and I can only report on data that sits inside a Dataverse right now. I can only report there. But now with the ability to bring a Power BI report in, we go up to my dashboard list. Now I have a system dashboard for a Contoso analytics report that I've brought in. This is kind of a sample. Again, this one's kind of focused on the sales example. And the cool thing is I can load that up, and we'll start seeing data light up here as we probably could have warmed this up ahead of time, but we'll see this light up. And good opportunity to take a sip of tea. So we'll see the data show up, and we're seeing this run across lots and lots of data. Lots and lots of data being pulled in across the organization. I'm seeing my pipeline, and once I've got the data in here, I can start using some of the tools like cross visualization, where I say I want to just narrow in on just the state of Washington. I click on Washington, the rest of the dashboard changes to show that that value. I can do things like I want to report on something, but I don't want to actually change the value of the data that sits in Dynamics or sits inside a Dataverse, but I want to adjust it just to see what if that factor changed. Might want to see how that would affect the data that's in my dashboard. So if I look over here on the right, I can see that what if the forecast, the qualified forecast changed by, we can change it to like 40%, a negative 40%. That just adds as a parameter that recalculates the data that's showing on my dashboard so that I can see if I change that value by negative 40%, how does that affect the rest of the data that's in here? So really a cool, the ability to go in and see these things in an interactive visual form is really helpful to business decision makers. We can look at other perspectives like win-loss overviews and see as we look at customers and say, all right, these are the warranties that are out there, or these are accessories, and they're, different teams are working better at closing their deals. And if in a sales perspective, and I could actually highlight a different, one of the teams and say, Ethan, your team members aren't closing deals as well. I want to take action on those deals. And you'll notice I've got a button here for a Power Automate button, effectively is what this is. And I can filter data in the dashboard, use the Power Automate button, and it will then do whatever action I've set up for that Power Automate to do. I mean, I could insert them into a SharePoint list, insert them into a list of inside a Dataverse. I could send them all an email, whatever I need to do in order to take action on that data. I don't have this one wired up to anything, but it will trigger and it will send that over and take care of it so we can see that happen. Otherwise, we could look at other perspectives like industries, and we can see data that's in here over time. If I click on this, on the button, it'll play back and it shows how over the months and years, different organization or different industries had better or worse behavior in terms of the size of the deals we got and the value of the deals we got and the number of deals we got in those industries. And if I click on one of these, I'll just click on, see who this is. This is the life insurance industry. If I highlight that, you'll sort of see the path that they took over the course of the years, as well as we filter it here, and we also see the top organizations associated with that particular business. Let's look up at trends that happen over time. In fact, one of the things I want to do is point out that we can take this same data and we can take a look at it from the visual information, the visuals, but also up right here, we're seeing the smart text, the text analytics, going through and looking at a particular team or whatever I've highlighted. And let's highlight the US West here. I'll highlight that. And you'll notice the text reorganizes itself or rewrites itself so that describing what's there. And that's really useful to just grab that, stick it in an email or stick it in a report that was necessary as I drill into individual teams or groups. Well, let's drop out. I'm going to pop this out to open it up inside of Power BI. I can do that by just clicking the button. I've already got it open here. And let's go to trends, and we'll go to our trend analytics. Just a second there. But we've got this incredible tool that allows us to see a lot of things that are going on. Let's go on up to Insights while we're waiting for that to load. If I go to Insights, I can see data that's been summarized and brought into the tool. So think about as you're working on a lot of data, there's things that influence an outcome. Whether it be in a sales organization, it might be what influences you to make the sale, what influences on a services thing, what influences it to turn into a satisfied customer. If it's a maintenance or a field service indication, what are the indications of a callback that you need that results in an incompletely serviced product. So all kinds of factors can be in a place there. It can be the person, the equipment, the time of day, the weather. All these factors can go into it. The key influencer visual lets us apply that AI to the application that we didn't have otherwise. It allows us to apply that and say, without any code at all, I'm just using the Dataverse data, pulling it and saying, okay, what influences things to be one? Well, the most important influence is whether they were part of the quarterly sales contest. Maybe I focus just on the accessories. I'll re-highlight to just the accessories, and you'll see it's recalculating everything. And quarterly sales is still there, but we now see Ann Weiler is one of our top salespeople. I could also flip it around and say, let me see the opposite direction. What influences things to be lost? What are our weak areas? And it'll recalculate the data. It says, if you don't have a campaign is blank. If they're not part of a marketing effort, or if they're part of the electric industry, or if Jeff Hayes is the salesperson, those aren't doing as well as the other factors. So maybe we link up Jeff with Ann to help Jeff learn the ways of the master to do a great job in selling the process. Here's the area that I want to show you a second ago. This is the trending pieces. And again, all this is just Power BI being looked at over top of Dataverse data. And you can see how it builds up this really amazing insights that you can deliver to the business without writing any code at all. So now I'm looking at these trend lines, and I can see that there's this nice upward trend, but all of a sudden there's a downward trend here at the last minute in October. I can right click on that and I can choose Analyze. And if you'll see right here below, it says Analyze. Do you want to explain the decrease? Yeah, I want to find out what's going on. Why did that trend go the wrong direction for us? And it will pull up an analysis of that data, and it's just going to use AI to run across the data and say, what are the elements that stick out for this decrease? Where did we not do as well on? We found that some of the develop had a significant decrease. We didn't sell as many of the warms. and where we also had a decision where we didn't sell as many when we had the decision maker. So, and also the 1-year warranty product. So a lot of factors that can help us understand more about why something didn't go the way we wanted it to go. We can also look at things like these trend lines, and we can see a forecast projection. Looking outward, we can see that following the projection of the time we had, we can go forward and say, you know what, we have a trend that's out here. We want to forecast that based on the seasonality and trends we see. We'll see what it looks like going forward. Down below, we're also seeing the revenue won by date, but we see 2 spikes out here. And you see a little bubble associated with those spikes. And that information is showing us that there was an anomaly. Something was unusual that day. Something didn't jive with the rest of the data that we had. Excuse me. You get all excited and I get cough, choked up here. Something didn't happen the way we expected it to. We can click on this anomaly, highlight that, and it's going to run again. It's going to run some regressions across our data and find out what is it that stood out for that day, whether it be the time to sale or the amount spent on repairs or the amount of overage we had or shortages. All those times of things, anything that jumps out, we can look and say, what are the possible explanations? Well, Amelia Gardner had that person won more than was expected based on the other patterns. We can look at other days and say, let's look at the rest of it and say, let's see if on this day where the purchase process was individual, we see a significant strength, the jump up, or the quarterly sales contest that took place on that day. So we get to these insights and we can even go further into it and say, can you just run across all the data and give me some insights on what's going on? And the automated tool will allow us to pull that in, where we can see anomalies, recent gains or trends that took place over time. So I say that is really just a way of saying, when I'm sitting inside of Dynamics, I've got this really rich ability to supplement the data that I have with data from outside the environment, as well as from data inside, and deliver more insightful interactions on that data, so that the customers who are using this, my customers who are using this, would actually say, let's go to active accounts. And the customers who are using this every day would then be able to see a lot of data that's going on throughout the process. Let's go to leads here. So now we're starting to see leads. One of the newest things, and I think this just rolled out this week. Scott Giroux, one of the CRM Dynamics MVPs, released a video on it earlier, and I didn't even realize it had hit the street yet. But the ability to build a Power BI dashboard directly inside of Dataverse is brand new as of this week. It's just rolling out in public preview. If you'll notice in my ribbon here, I'm looking at open leads, and I can say visualize this view. If I go to visualize this view, I can click here, and I see a Power BI window show up. This Power BI window is a kind of a quick view, quick dashboard that can be built over top of this data. And it will take a second, and what it's going to do is look at the view that I'm looking at, look at the columns of the view that I'm looking at, and it's going to try to build a quick Power BI report for me. If you'll notice, we'll see my open leads here, and if I expand that, I see the names of the fields that are in my view, and that will include the fields that are there, as well as if I had additional fields associated with it, and a simple measure of the count of the number of views, the dates, the company names, etc. And it will just build a quick interactive view. And this one's only got 9 records in it, so it's not that big, but I can click down here below and hit show data table. It'll rebuild this, but this time it's going to build it with a view at the bottom here of the fields that we have. So if I click there, we see we have the subject was new store open this week. I've got 2 records here in the subject. If I click that, it's going to then filter the data down below. We'll have those values showing up. And I can do this on any dashboard. It's running against the TDS endpoint in the background, so it's not subject to the 50,000 row limit. It is subject to a larger limit of 80 megabytes in total records, 80 megabytes of total data returned, but it's not subject to that minimum record number. So that's available. If you want to enable that in your environment, you can go to Power Apps to your the app level, click on the app, and click on Edit, but not the regular edit. Click on Edit and Preview. So T. When you edit and preview, then you can go to the settings menu, click up here, and in the features area, you'll see a new feature here called Enable Power BI Quick Visualization Report on a table. It's a preview. Now it is definitely a preview. I even had found a bug in it the other day that had to do with a browser plugin that was causing problems. So be aware that it's a preview. Please try it out and provide some feedback on it. Let us know what you think about it. What would you like to see in it? Where would you like to go with it? Because it's a really cool piece that's you're gonna see more of over the year. But in the meantime, how do we take care of some of this? How do we enable our teams, our tools in place? Let's go ahead and go back to my slideshow. We've seen this. We've seen how to build it in the dashboard. We've seen it on the main form. Oh, what? I didn't actually show you this. This is the cool thing. I totally forgot this. Let's go here. I'll go back here. I'm going to flip back to my environment and go to leads, go to accounts. So we talked about this big picture view where we see all the accounts or all the opportunities or all whatever the record is. And let's see. Go to append. Sorry, let me jump. Okay, so there we are. So now I'm looking at my list of accounts that are out there, and I can go into, let's just pick one of them here. We'll go to Grady Group. Click on Grady Group. I've got my my view that I would expect of the records that are in place. I can go to a company profile, which is a normal, just another view. But if you'll notice, I've added an analytics tab, and I'm on the Grady Group record. If I click on this analytics tab, it's going to open. If you'll notice, there's a Power BI icon teasing us here, loading for us. And what it's going to do is going to load the data, and it's taking the record, a value from the record I'm on. In this case, I'm passing the account ID. I'm passing it to Power BI as a filter, so the Power BI report opens in a filtered report to Grady Group. So I've got this really cool ability to say, I'm going to the Grady Group record. Now I want you to use the fact that you know that I'm on the Grady Group record, use that as a filter to pull reports out of multiple systems, pull them together so I can have that 360-degree view of Grady Group. I want to see all the things that are going on about Grady Group, whether it be the sales, their service, their field service, their accounts, or their inventory. All those things that are out there in my organization that I want to pull together, and so that anybody who's looking at Grady Group immediately has that quick view into all these other systems. Again, when I mentioned at the top of the conversation, that's one of the ways in which I've made Power BI, or the Power BI integration has made my Power App and my team an invaluable app, and one that suddenly nobody can live without that app. Whereas before it was kind of a, come on, let's all use this app together. Let's pull together. Let's be good. Now everybody's like, oh yeah, we have to use that. Let's keep it up. And as soon as there's any kind of hiccup, somebody goes, somebody's on Teams going, hey Scott, what's going on? So it's a really powerful way in which we can get all that in place. So let's take a look. Let's jump back to the deck. We've seen how to embed a report in there. We see how to do a Power BI dashboard. By the way, if you want to embed it in a form, There is official documentation on the Microsoft site on how to do it. That's the hard way. The easy way is to use the XRM toolbox with a tool that Ivan built, one of the MVPs. He built a tool that allows us to just place the URL and a GUID for the report itself, and then pass in the values. In this case, I'm passing in the contact and the parent customer ID, pulling that into the record, and then that is what allows me to filter that embedded Power BI report and make that visible for us. Really cool ability. So other options. So how do we? So we've talked about different ways we can display it. Now, how do we take that all this data that's available to us and report on it? Because we need to be able to get the data from Dataverse into the model-driven app, or excuse me, the Power BI report, and in order to take advantage of it. So there's three major ways in which we're doing it. Well, there's a lot of variations within that, but I'm going to focus on these three. One is direct query using the Dataverse connector. The second is import mode. And the third is using Azure Data Lake or Azure Synapse Analytics link. Three really different approaches to it. The first two use the same connector. One of them is a direct query, which means the moment I run the report, nothing is in that report. The report is actually empty, but it uses the person who's logged in. It uses their credentials to go retrieve data from Dataverse and pull it into the report. So it's real time. It's the data that you see on the report is as of the moment you open that report and launch those queries. It's best for like targeted, focused team dashboards, something that's a limited scope. It's not really based for, show me all the activity for the last 3 years. It's really saying, show me what's going on right now. Show me what the open issues are. Show me the data that's associated with my report, all my open opportunities or all my things. It's really focused on that perspective. There's another perspective where we say, okay, I want to refresh this data regularly and keep it up to date in the database, but I'm not really concerned about user context. This is a report for my managers, so they really already have permission to see all the data. They're really looking at bigger picture views of across all the teams. That's where I would use import mode. Pull it in, because when I open the report, if I've used import mode, when I open the report, it's all pre-cached. And so there's no lag or delay when I open the report. It's already there and available for me to see for the user as they see it, and they can interact with the data immediately. So which is different from if I'm doing direct query, it waits till the user opens the report to go get the latest version of the data. In the import mode, it's already pre-cached that data and available to run. It's great for medium-sized data sets, a couple 100,000 records, all that's, quite nice. But then there's another scale. There's another area where we say, okay, we've got to take all this data we have in Dataverse and we got to blow it up into lots and lots of data, millions of records. Plus, we're going to mash up this data with tons of data from other sources and really run cool analytics across it. That's where the Azure Data Lake or Synapse link that you see inside of Dataverse, that's where that comes into. In that case, all the data has been exported into the data lake and is now available for Synapse Analytics to run across, summarize that data, and make it available into a Power BI report. Hugely scalable. So it's yet the third and the highest tier in terms of complexity as well as scalability. Some benefits, available directly in Power BI. It's real time, but there's also the downside of using the Dataverse connector is that there is an 80 megabyte limit to the size of the query results. So as I go through that result set, I could have 10 million records that are in there, but if I'm only reporting on this week's opportunities, the result set's going to be, quite small. So think about the result set as the 80 megabyte limit. Lots of things available to it. We can also look at the Synapse. You'll have the access to the slides at the end. The Synapse side, step up in complexity, but also a major unlocker in terms of capability. So which one's right use case? Which one's right for my use case? As always, it depends, right? That's always the answer. The database query size, what you mentioned, that's a consideration. Smaller data sets, Dataverse direct query, fantastic. Bigger enterprise scale, Azure Synapse is the unlocks those opportunities. Query complexity, simpler queries we can run in Dataverse with Power Query or SQL. Azure Synapse unlocks ability to use SQL as well as Spark. Some really cool analytics available there. Mashup, latency of data. The Dataverse is actually running at real time, and so when you open the data, it's pulling it as at that moment. Synapse, it's not real time, but there's a regular cadence. It's updating every few minutes. So there's a little bit of a lag, but it's not instant. It's not the same as real time. Effort to implement, Dataverse is always going to be small, simpler. Azure Synapse, much more scalability, but you would then have to then apply for, if you needed to handle row level security, you would need to handle that there. So it's not going to inherit the user context or the user security the way that Dataverse or direct query would, the Dataverse direct query approach would handle and inherit that security model from within Dataverse to the user who's viewing that report in real time. So let's talk about how to connect Power BI to Dataverse. Easiest way is if I'm using Power BI and use the Dataverse connector, there is now a Power BI, a Dataverse button inside of Power BI. You can point to it, you can navigate into the environment that you want to connect to, and then start selecting fields off of that environment that you want to focus on. So very quickly, you can go directly in there and you get the choice of an import or direct query mode at that point. It's important that you can do that. It's a great way to start. We'll talk about some other options that are available. Another option is if we do create a Dataverse SQL-based report, we can do that inside the model, and it's very quick and easy if you're comfortable with SQL. But you can also write a report and use the current user variable, and that variable says, filter this based on the current user that's in there. And so I can, even if I have access to see all opportunities, I may want to have a data set that's only the opportunities where I'm the owner of those opportunities. So current user is a nice feature that's available if you use the SQL version of that in Dataverse. Finally, if you wanted to prepare those SQL statements, you can just use the SSMS. But there's also Mark Carrington, MVP, wrote a nice tool called XRM Toolbox SQL for CDS, and you can build your CDS query and then grab that query off there and paste that into Dataverse. But that's available. So Dataverse direct query best practices. Now direct query, because that is that runtime, and when I open the report, there's no data there. It goes and gets all that data at that very moment. There's a performance hit to that. The data's not there until you've opened the report. So the moment you open the report, it's waiting for you to go get the data. So some performance, I've got some best practices here to think about in order to get the best performance out of the process. One, stay focused on the use case. Do not try to build a Power BI report that solves everybody's problems at all times in the future, now and forevermore. Amen. This is not going to work. Just focus on the use case. What does this team need? What is the parameters? And keep it limited to that. Second, this is a hard one. This one comes from my heart. Embrace what we call a star schema. A star schema is not this. This is what a Dataverse schema looks like. It's all the cool relationships between records. That's not a optimum model for analytics. It's great for Dataverse. It's not the one you want to use for analytics. In analytics, we start with this middle table. We say, what is our fact? Our fact is our opportunity. What are the dimensions that describe that opportunity? Those are our dimensions that are off the side. So we have our fact and our dimension tables. It takes getting used to. But if you start with, there's going to be one fact table and everything else fits off as a dimension of that fact, that will help you. But there's also some links available to say, understanding what that star schema is. Why is it different from a relational model? So we can understand what's going on in that. Minimize the number of query columns you go for. So if by default, if I open up the system user record, there's more than 1,000 columns. You don't need 1,000 columns in your data set normally. But if you go by default and say, just give me all columns, it's not going to work. It's going to choke. What we want to do is instead select the columns that you want. Pick the columns, only the individual ones you need. You can always go back and add more. Just pick the ones you need at first, and then you can pull it together and say, in this case, I've got the system user ID, and I've got the name. At the end of that, that's all I need, and I can add more if I need to. Leverage the query editor. So I was showing you going through interactively through the wizard, but there's also the ability of you can just open up advanced editor and manually edit that and start with a very simplified query. In fact, I've got in here, I'll step out of the way here. I've got a query that allows me to pick just the columns that I want, jump into that, and start with just a streamlined, simplified, and then gradually add only the fields and columns that I actually need, so that I have the better use case. So you take advantage of that. Another area, avoid large blocks of text. They're great for some kinds of reports. They're not necessary in analytic reports. So things like the facts that you have your topics, the dates, the counts, the volume. Those are all facts that you want to be able to use. The descriptive text about it, leave that inside a Dataverse. Or you could use a paginated report in some cases, but those are not analytical fields. So leave those behind and focus on these facts, and that will give you the best use case. Another area that's a little surprising is minimize the way in which you use choice columns or option sets. So behind the scenes, as you know, Dataverse supports multilingual data implementation. So as a result, in the data set, there's an integer value that represents what you chose. And if I chose booking resources or banks, I would be picking 22 or 14. And then behind the scenes, there's actually another table that has the 14 means banking in English, or 14 means banque in French, whatever it is. And I've got that lookup, that cross-reference. So when you filter on that, if you filter on the label, number one, it's not going to be multilingual supported. You're going to run into problems if somebody opens it in another language. Number two, you're filtering on a related table, not on the core table. So the performance hit is there. So whenever possible, always focus on filter on that numeric value behind the scenes and make it available to the user. There's some other cases where if you get into really, really big things, you might want to just pull the numeric value over and add the text to it once it gets into Power BI, but that's kind of an extreme use case. Consider dual mode. This is a Power BI concept. Keep your fact, that runtime, the real time, only pulls that, but the things that are dimensions, like the industry list or the list of users, you can put those in what we call dual mode, and it won't have to go requery every time you touch the report. So makes it a little easier and a little more performant for those things that are just lookup lists that are effectively there. Ensure the query is folding. I've got a link to a record talking about Power Query folding, but there's really a simple, I won't call it a hack, but effectively, if you can go in and choose View Native Query in Power Query, and if I click on Related and choose View Native Query, and it pulls up that, in essence, it's probably folding it nicely, but you can see that, and that will help you gain some efficiency if you handle that very nicely. And finally, when you publish it, don't forget the checkbox. If you'll notice, there's a configure Dataverse connection when I've published it up in the service, and this check mark right here says report viewers can only access the data source within their own Power BI identities using direct query. That means If I check that box, when I, as Scott Sewell, log in and say, give me the data I'm allowed to see, it's going to say, okay, let me use Scott Sewell's credentials and ask Dataverse to show me the data that Scott Sewell is allowed to see. And it's going to return that data. If I don't check that, it's going to use those credentials of whoever published the report. So that's an important one to keep in mind if you want the report to be filtered according to the user who's logged in. Finally, resources. I did a dev camp recently on Power BI. Some of the pieces I showed, but I showed a little bit more about how do you create those, how you install those. If you go to this link, it'll get you there, as well as there's a couple of links to GitHub links for the Power BI Dev Camp that will give you copies of some reports that I built, sort of sample starter reports on Dataverse, just to give you some ideas of what that might look like, as well as a deck that describes that. Power BI, there's a whole effort or a whole subset of Power BI to make a report. You can build a developer can build a report. It takes somebody with a little bit more of an eye, a design eye, to build a beautiful report, one that will be used. There's a great Learn course available that just came out a few weeks ago, talking about how to design an effective report. It's really thinking about from the visual perspective of the user who's going to see that report. I'll be the first to say my first reports were just dog ugly. They're awful. They were terrible because I was thinking about it from a developer's perspective. And if I got the right answer on the report, I was happy. But when somebody else looked at it, they were like, what is this supposed to mean? How do I use this report? And I started seeing how they would use it, and I'd be like, oh, it's awful. And so this report, this course is really good. Just like I said, just like designers are typically not developers. Developers are rarely aesthetically gifted designers, but there are some tools and some processes you can follow that will help you think about how to arrange this report visually so it's beautiful and people will use the report, as opposed to just being correct is not enough. And finally, lots and lots of docs that will help you solve these problems. Lots of resources that are available. It's an amazing resource. So we talked a lot about that, and I'm going to put up on the link. I copied my report. This deck that you're looking at, I've copied up into this link. So if you just go to that GitHub link, you can find this this PowerPoint deck that I'm presenting from right now, and you have access to all of those hyperlinks that are in the report throughout. With that having said, I think I'm at time, or I'm close to it, and be happy to take any questions that came up. I haven't really been able to see the chat through the process. Hopefully that's there have been some questions. Anyone online that
Thank you very much, Scott, for that whirlwind bootcamp on Power BI. I have to say, especially the direct query tips are very useful, not just in Power BI, but in so much platform features or some of the integration features. So really useful tips. So thank you so much for that. So Eduardo's asking, so the main difference from direct query versus import is the double hop credential issue is resolved between web UI, Power BI, dashboard, besides performance?
Yeah, so a couple of things that the difference is, if I do an import mode, whoever publishes the report as an import mode, the data that goes into the report is based on the credentials of that person who's importing the data on whatever schedule that's importing on. If I use direct query, there's no data that's been pre-pulled into that report. It waits until I open the report, and it says who's the user who's opened that report, and goes and asks Power BI, goes and asks Dataverse, says, this is Scott who's opening this report. What data is Scott allowed to see? And so it uses the credentials of me at that moment.
Thank you for that.
So, I mean, the performance-wise, there's a hit because there's nothing there when I open the report, as opposed to import mode, which the data is already there. It's faster, but it's kind of a trade-off there.
Eduardo's asking, on which Power BI workspace this quick view is generated to be rendered at Dataverse UI?
So this is currently an ephemeral report, meaning that when I open the report, it'll generate and I can view it, but as soon as I click the close button, that report disappears. So it's only in the browser. A future version may let us, I can't speak for the product team, but I think a future version allows you to download that report and then publish it if you wish to. But the current version just is it's sitting in the browser until you close the window.
Manuel is asking, can you save those auto-generated dashboards to be published in the service, for example?
Same question. Not yet, but hopefully soon.
Okay, great. Yep. And there's a final comment by Victor on direct query. There is a performance hit each time you filter the report.
Yeah. So you're right, because as you're filtering the report, remember the data is not already extracted until you do that. That's why using those dual mode dimension tables helps you, because it doesn't require each of those dimension tables to be requeried every time you make a change to a filter, typically. So if you pull it from cached, it will. So it is a performance hit, because as you change filters, it's going back and asking for more data. There are ways in which it starts caching and improving that. And I will say that deeper into the Power BI side of it, you can build what we call aggregation tables to help improve the responsiveness of it. It will also say if you've already queried one result set and it says, hey, I've already got that result set in memory, it'll use that as opposed to going all the way back to the server each time. But yeah, there is a performance hit as you interact with the report, because it's going back and asking for new data in those cases.
Thank you. And the final question by Dahir is, I'd like to use the Dataverse comment for Power BI desktop, but our firewall is strict. What ports need to be open?
So for Power BI to talk to the Dataverse connector, it does need the SQL 1433. Is that right? It's the standard SQL connector port to be able to talk to it. That's when you're on the desktop connecting to when you're building a report in the desktop, connecting to Dataverse through the TDS endpoint, because it is a SQL emulator endpoint. When you're doing that, it does need the port 1433. Once it's published to the service, it's just talking server to server. And so that connection's already in place. But only during the development cycle, you have to have that port 1433 open up. And I know that's a situation in some of the banks or financial services that can be blocked at times. But I've seen in some cases where they said, okay, for these users, these developers, we're going to allow you to have a port 1433 open, or we're going to create a virtual machine that sits outside of our firewall that all it's allowed to do is talk to Dataverse and Power BI and run a copy of the data Power BI desktop for development purposes. Once you publish it, it's cool for everybody, but we've seen that to be the case in some situations.
Okay, and there's a comment here by Sachin saying, excellent session, Scott Sewell, very informative.
Great, I'm glad it was helpful.
Definitely. I have to say that it was definitely been, I've definitely learned a lot today as well. Right. And Manuel Santiago saying, thank you, Scott. Good stuff. And Dahir as well. Awesome. Thank you, Scott. So again, round of applause, everyone, to Scott Sewell.
Thank you.
Very much a legend in the community, and it's just great just to reaffirm that today, just by attending your session, just how well intuitive and communicated you are. So thanks for that. So Scott, do you have any final comments or announcements to make?
Just reach out. There's so much information that's available, but sometimes it's a needle in a haystack. Grab this copy of the deck. It will give you some of the pointers to some of the key pieces that I've learned over the time. And it is a learning curve. Be patient with yourself. Have fun. Enjoy it. But the results can be amazing.
Wow. And just to top and put a cherry on the cake, is one thing having Scott Sewell, but we've also got Yurik saying, great stuff, Scott, as always. So
Hey,
we've
man.
got two
Good to
legends
see you.
there, two reporting legends. We've got Scott Sewell and we've got Yurik Clarkson. Okay, well,
Awesome.
once again, thank you, Scott, for delivering this session for the Dataverse Summit
Thanks for the invite.
and plugging the gap for Power BI. Highly beneficial. It's been a great experience for everyone. Awesome. Wow. Well, it was great and refreshing just to even see Scott, actually, just to actually see him and, see his image. To be honest, it's been very refreshing and energizing. So that's been great. And just on to our last session of the day now. So for those who've been waiting, we are on the last session of the day with Victor. So Victor, thank you so much for obviously being patient, for being the last session of the day.